Well, welcome everybody to the summit on pavement preservation and when and where. The title for this summit for when and where is the benefits of using whole life approach to pavement preservation project and treatment selection. Before I go any further, I want to talk about the focus today in transportation is on sustainability infrastructure through whole life investments and quantifying the risk. Here with this slide, we talk a little bit about why pavement preservation is important. Good roads are vital for our economy. Pavement preservation has a significant investment for our pavements, and preservation is 6 times less expensive than rehabilitation and requires fewer resources and energy. For those that have a participant notebook, please follow along. All our slides are there. Make note. And if you have any discussions or any comments, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you as we go through. As we were told earlier today, here's some of the basic background of everyday counts. It's based on a state-based model to identify, rapidly deploy proven but underutilized innovations to shorten project delivery, enhance roadway safety, reduce congestion, and improve environmental sustainability. And pavement preservation's there. As well as we're on round 4 for Everyday Counts 4, and this, along with pavement preservation, how was selected. Furthermore, we talk about pavement preservation when and where. And at this point, I want to talk a little bit about, under our current federal statute and asset management, USC 119, and a performance management, 23 USC 150, states that states are required to include consideration of pavement preservation as part of their long-term business practice that support federal aid funding. And here, as you can see, we're going to focus on whole life costs of these assets to reduce our annual preservation costs without sacrificing performance. And through this, we want to look at our life cycle cost analysis as an alternative strategies for managing our pavements. Furthermore, we have all seen pavement condition curves, and as you can see here, if we do pavement preservation correctly, up here early on, we are going to conserve our funding as time goes by as the pavement deteriorates. Our pavement preservations are up here, then we have our major preservation or minor rehab, minor to major, and our total reconstruction. As you can see here on the far right, it goes from our treatments from very good to very poor. Here we have examples: crack seal, seal coats, the overlays, diamond grinding for our PCC pavements. Here for fair, thin overlays, full depth repairs, and for poor, our slab replacement, fixed overlays, and cold in place recycling. And over a period of time, as this curve is, this is time, and on the far left shows the poor, fair, and good conditions. As well, we also have this curve that shows for a department or agency what they want to look at. As you can see on a normal pavement preservation project, if they do not do any kind of treatment, they're going to get this kind of curve. And then what happens at a period of time, as here at 25 years, they're going to have a major rehabilitation project that'll exceed the cost for that particular project. However, during the period of this 7 years to 25, if they did some kind of pavement preservation treatments, they could extend that period of time and have low cost for the agency, less amount of maintenance cost, and make it a valuable alternative for using that preservation. For the consumers, they can have the roads that they don't have to worry about traffic. They can have smoother roads and be valuable for them to use the roadways. Next, here we're going to talk about pavement preservation, when and where it fit into the FHWA EDC 4. Currently, there's 2 pavement preservation technologies. The other one that's going to be talked later that afternoon is pavement preservation how. Our focus is on when and where. We'll focus on network level investment strategies that consider life cycle planning. In the past 3 or 4 months, we've had virtual summits where we had webinars with our division offices as well as state agencies to start looking at our implementation plans introducing technologies, and hear what the owner agencies really are concerned with, what the barriers and gaps are to move this forward. In 2017 and 2018, we're going to be talking about the delivery of the implementation plan activities and roll it out from there. Currently, here's our technical working group. We have 10 states as well as 2 other industry, one from the American Concrete Association and the National Asphalt Pavement Preservation that's on our technical working group that we're working with on this implementation plan, and we look forward to having it somewhat complete by early next year to where we can move on to go to the next direction of where we're going to take this for Everyday Counts 4. With that, I'd like to introduce Katie Zimmerman, and she'll talk about the implementation plan.
Hi, thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Zimmerman with Applied Paving Technology, and together with ICT, we are the contractor to FHWA. And one of our tasks under this is to develop an implementation plan that's going to guide FHWA in developing products, training, other kinds of outputs that will help advance the use of pavement preservation in agencies. So throughout this summit, one of the things that we're going to be doing is trying to extract from you some information as to what will help the FHWA and your agencies advance these ideas a little bit further. We do that by putting together an implementation plan that gives an overview of sort of what is the innovation, what is the technology that is being promoted, what are we trying to achieve with that technology, who's the target audience within a DOT, and what kinds of things would help advance the state of the practice. So we really need your help in developing this topic a little bit further. Now, what we've done so far is we've come up with a vision. And in that vision, we have identified that we want agencies to use more life cycle planning activities to promote the use of preservation. We find that there are some agencies that are using preservation to some degree, but if they could think about increasing the amount of preservation or using preservation more proactively, we're thinking that they could save a lot of money. And we have evidence from several states that have been able to save money by using more preservation treatments. So we think that there's benefit. Not only will it save the agency money, so they'll be able to stretch the limited dollars that they have to do more with it, we also think they'll be able to set higher performance targets for their pavement network, even with the same amount of money that they have today. So we think that there are significant benefits that could be realized, but it's also going to help them respond to some of the federal legislation that's requiring them to do life cycle planning as part of the development of their asset management plan. But there's challenges to this. A lot of agencies have sort of a way of doing business and maybe haven't fully adopted a preservation strategy. And we're trying to get an idea of, are the issues up at the executive level? Are they at the technical level? Are they in the public level? Where are the challenges that we're going to be dealing with if we were trying to adopt this in your agency? So one of the things that's the biggest challenge with this is pavement preservation is a policy issue. It's a philosophy. It's a technique that we put into practice. So it's not like a little tool that you hook on the back of a device and suddenly it all works perfectly. So during the discussion later on, we're going to be extracting from you, are there products or techniques or training, or what do you think could be developed to help advance these ideas a little bit further? We have come to the conclusion that for life cycle planning to be successful, it's going to require looking at least 4 different areas or topics within a DOT. One is there's going to need to be some different tools. Many agencies have pavement management systems or bridge management tools that allow them to analyze different strategies. But even so, they aren't all necessarily adopting these strategies fully. For example, there's one DOT that I was working with that they do preservation activities, But we wanted to challenge them to say, look, if we did more preservation on some of your lower volume roads, let's see if we could achieve some better conditions. But they said, no, this is the amount of preservation we're comfortable with, and just sort of left it at that. How do we get agencies to think about more, looking at different strategies to see whether it could be more cost effective? That's one of the challenges that we're dealing with. We also realize there's going to need to be some improved business processes to make sure that everybody is aligned. In a lot of the DOTs that we see, money is allocated to the districts, and then the districts make decisions about what products or what treatments are going to be selected and when they're going to be done. Some of those districts may have a very strong preservation focus, and they may be putting that into practice, but other districts may not have as strong a preservation focus. So there's a disconnect between what the districts are doing within the organization that causes some concern at the higher levels, at the central office level in the DOT, because now the central office is going to have to set a performance target, and they're going to have to ensure that they're making progress towards that target. If they don't have knowledge or control over what the districts are doing, there may be some concern about whether they're going to be able to achieve their targets. So we're thinking that there are going to need to be some improved business processes that make sure everybody is aligned. We also think that there may be some different performance measures that need to be developed in order to show the benefits of preservation. Things like improvements in the ride quality doesn't really entice a decision maker to move in a certain direction. If you guys go to your legislators or your council members or whoever is in charge and you say, oh my gosh, the average condition of our network is going to drop from 73 to 72, does that prompt them to do anything? Usually not, because they don't understand what that difference means. So are there different metrics that we need to be talking about in order to get them on board? And then there might also be some efforts in workforce development and capacity building that need to be done to make sure that all of the people at all levels of the organization understand why preservation is being used and know how to use the treatments correctly. And that's part of the how that the afternoon group is going to focus on. So why is this topic even important? Why is this something that FHWA decided to invest in EDC? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is it does help with some of the new federal legislation that's in place. As you know, MAP 21 and the FAST Act have really promoted the use of performance-based decisions in the organizations. One of the requirements of the new legislation is that all states are required to develop a transportation asset management plan. Included in that plan is life cycle planning and risk analysis. Now, from a life cycle planning analysis, what that means is that you're looking at different investment strategies to make sure that you are making good long-term investments in your system. The whole idea there is pavements have a value. You've invested a lot of money in your pavement network, and we're trying to preserve the value in that network as much as possible. So we see pavement preservation and this life cycle planning strategy as being one way that you can help meet some of the requirements under the federal legislation, but also enable you to save the agency money. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges we have is that many agencies are approaching these asset management plans, and several states have really bought into it, and they're using the asset management plans to really change the way they're doing business. But there are some agencies that haven't really used this to really change the way they're doing business. They're looking at it as, what's the minimum that I need to do in order to meet the federal requirements? And I think what we want is we're trying to encourage more states to see this as an opportunity to change some of the things that could be improved in doing business. Ohio DOT is one of the states that has bought into this totally. And one of the reasons that they bought into this is they did a life cycle plan analysis, and what they found was if they increased the amount of pavement preservation, bridge preservation and culvert preservation that was done, they could redirect $300 million over 6 years to other priorities. They presented that to their executive leadership, and the executive leadership said, go for it. We are going to buy into this whole hog. And they said, you have a couple of years to make this be a reality with these kinds of savings. So what that meant was they had to change the way they were doing business. They had to do a lot of training to get people on board with the skills to do this. And they are now in their 3rd programming cycle of using more preservation towards savings this money every year. One of the things that they had to do was they had to change the way that they were doing their business processes. And that was required because they were one of those states where the districts were all doing their own thing. There were a couple of districts that were very strong preservation focus and other districts that weren't. So the DOT realized that in order for them to realize their savings, they needed to have a little bit more central office involvement in the programs that the districts are putting together. And so they changed from funds allocated to the districts based on formulas, with districts picking their own project, which may or may not meet the state performance goals, to having more the use of a pavement management system to make recommendations for the districts, so they had a better feel for what kinds of treatments would be good candidates. Then the districts work with the central office to put together their program allocated to the districts to match their program. So it's a slight difference, a little bit more central office involvement, but they feel that now they have more confidence that they're going to be able to achieve their performance goals. One of the other things that the Ohio DOT did was they put in place a knowledge management plan that outlined all of the training that was going to be needed at all levels within their DOT to get everybody on board. The people in the district offices are the people who have the most contact with the public. They needed to be able to explain why they were doing what they were doing and what it meant to the DOT. They needed to be able to use the right technology and know when something was a good candidate for preservation. They needed to be able to understand those kinds of things, and so that was part of their knowledge management plan, was to put that training in place. One of the other things that they did was they developed a video that really emphasizes for the public why they're moving forward with this preservation program. And I wanted to show you, it's a very short video clip, but I wanted to show you one of the things that they've put together to get your reaction during our discussion as to whether this is something that might be beneficial.
Do you ever think about how groceries are at the store when you need them? How your online orders get to your front door? And how factories receive their parts? Or how you drive from city to city around Ohio? The answer? Ohio's strong transportation system. The roads and bridges you use daily also make it possible to sell Ohio's top exports: crops, vehicles, plastics, and machinery to the rest of the world. This is why it's so important to keep the more than 43,000 miles of roads and 14,000 bridges that ODOT maintains in good shape. It's for the easy movement of people and goods from place to place. So how does ODOT do this? Especially since repair costs have gone up, but funding has not. Through a carefully planned strategy involving technology, collaboration, and aggressive preservation. Using highly advanced software, ODOT measures a wide range of data related to roads and bridges. Then we calculate maintenance priorities across the state, focusing on the highest benefits for the lowest cost. This helps collaboration between our planners, engineers, highway crews, and contractors, who all work from the same plans and share firsthand practical knowledge. Together, they determine the preservation treatment for the bridges and roads under our care. For example, we clean and seal bridge joints, surfaces, and drains more than ever to get out in front of problems before they occur. And we use different paving techniques to make roads last longer at a fraction of the cost. This three-pronged approach allows ODOT to redirect an estimated $300 million toward more maintenance over the next 6 years. It's like changing the oil in your car regularly. It's cheaper than having to replace the entire engine. It's also smarter and gives you a better, safer ride. By taking care of what we have, ODOT constantly strives to keep Ohio's people, goods, and services moving efficiently and safely today and far into the future. Go to our website to learn more.
Another state that has been very successful in this area, I see we have the wrong name on the presentation, Dave, is Washington State DOT. And Dave Luhr is here from Washington State, and he's going to talk a little bit about their program and some of the benefits that they've been able to see.
Morning, I'm Dave Luhr. I'm the pavement management engineer for WashDOT. And I'm going to show you some examples today of what we've been doing in Washington, and give you an appreciation for some of the things we've been trying. Just a quick background. At WashDOT, we've got about 18,500 lane miles in our state-maintained system. So it's about 35th in terms of size of lane miles in the U.S., so we're smaller than the average state, with about a $15 billion replacement cost that is only associated with pavements. That doesn't include real estate or bridges or other expenses. That's simply our pavement replacement cost. And we've got, in terms of lane miles, 3 different categories of surface types of concrete, chip seal, and asphalt with different percentages. You see concrete's about 13%, chip seal 32%, and asphalt 55%. And then when we look at vehicle miles traveled, that, as you would expect on those chip seal miles, mostly low volume roads, so we've got much less traffic. Concrete is primarily in our interstate system, so we have a lot of traffic on our concrete roads, and then asphalt making up the difference. So performance management in MAP 21, we've seen the rules, the final rules for asset management, and next month we expect to see the rules for performance management, but not in the rules, but in the law itself. It says performance management will transform the federal aid highway program and provide the means to the most efficient investment of federal transportation funds. Well, in the MAP 21 performance measures, there isn't really anything geared towards the most efficient investment. There's no real measures in there for measuring efficient investments, and that's going to be the concentration of what I'm going to talk about today, is how at WashDOT we've kind of focused on cost effectiveness as a means for helping us make decisions and to manage our pavements. So the reason why we're using cost effectiveness, or how we're doing it, is we start off with an objective. We want to deliver acceptable performance at the lowest life cycle cost. So the word acceptable is important there, because it'd be real easy to deliver the lowest life cycle cost if you didn't care about level of service. So we set an acceptable limit, and we have criteria for that in terms of cracking, rutting, and roughness. And then we can use a cost effectiveness measure to then evaluate different treatments for delivering that acceptable performance. And so this is a simplification over benefit cost analysis. It's really difficult with a benefit cost analysis to associate benefits of good performance. What's the value in terms of dollars of a good performing road? It's really difficult to come up with that quantitatively. So we just simplified it. Let's just say performance has to be acceptable, and once we have acceptable performance, let's deliver that at the most cost-effective means. And how we calculate that, we use equivalent uniform annual cost. This is a standard engineering economics term where we may have net present value, but anything that is a cost expended at a certain time, we can always calculate what the annual cost is. So it's a pretty straightforward method for looking at streams of costs. And the benefits to that is that it gives us a pretty simple tool of evaluating and comparing different projects. It gives us a good common denominator. If I'm comparing two treatment strategies, one that may be cheaper in the last 6 years, and another one more expensive, maybe the last 20 years, well, if I'm using net present value, it's difficult to run the cost on that because I have to come up with an equal length of time period. But with annual costs, I can just look at the cost stream, so I don't have to look at a salvage value. So it's simpler and a very easy measure to use. Now, how versatile it is, it gives us $1 per lane mile per year that we use with everything. So we can compare all of our treatments on the same scale. It doesn't really matter what it is. We can always evaluate it on that very simple comparison. We've also got dollars per easel. I'm not going to get into very much in this presentation, but it allows us to look at how efficiently we're hauling freight. We can use it in a historical perspective. So after a period of time, we can look backwards in time and say, well, what was the actual cost? When we do comparisons and evaluating different pavement type alternatives, we come up with a cost and we make decisions, but how often do we go back and look at, well, after 20 years, what was the actual cost that we spent on that pavement? So this is more of a performance measure, see how well are we managing our pavements. And we can also look at it into the future in terms of what is our expected cost and our expected life for different kinds of pavement treatments that we're considering. So with this table, I'm going to talk not really in a lot of detail, but in general terms about some of the numbers here. Now, these are not weighted by lane miles or any firm actual numbers. These are typical values that we have across the state. And we've got on the left side, we've got these are 3 different pavement types that I mentioned first. And we've got different treatment categories for each pavement type. So we've got maintenance, rehab, and reconstruction for the different pavement types. And you notice that the word preservation doesn't appear on this slide. Well, that's because as we go from state to state, we run into different definition of terms. And in Washington, our legislature has defined preservation to mean all kinds of preservation treatments, including reconstruction, when it considers spending money either on a preservation or improvement project. So we're kind of stuck with the way that our legislature and our administration uses the word preservation. So when we try to overlap that with the way FHWA defines preservation, there's some, naturally some overlap, but it's not the same. So our main preservation work, as FHWA would call it, occurs in our maintenance and rehabilitation. Our typical maintenance treatment, a typical rehabilitation is resurfacing, and that would be a mill and fill that's less than 2 inches. So that would fall under FHWA's definition of preservation because it's a thin inlay and it does not significantly change the pavement structure. But maybe about 20% of our resurfacing is when we're adding additional structure. Sometimes we run into cases where maybe due to a poor subgrade or additional traffic, we feel the pavement structure needs some strengthening. So we will add additional structure at a particular time. So the FHWA definition of preservation it overlays the maintenance and rehabilitation part of that, but not exactly. So we don't make decisions based on a chart like this. This is just kind of a general indication of where our costs are, and each of our decisions are made on an individual project basis. But you can see that we've got agency cost, and this is all inclusive. This includes design and construction costs. So, but it does not include user costs. So we have a separate analysis that we use on our higher volume roads where we do include an evaluation of user delay cost, but that's not included here. But the main two key points are how much are we spending on any given treatment and what's the life extension. So with that, then we can calculate the annual cost, and I've got two different columns for annual cost, one with a 0 discount rate, a very simple comparison, and one with a 4% discount rate, which is how we consider the time value of money. So we calculate both just so we can evaluate, is there any difference in our decision because we're considering discount rate or not? Usually it makes no difference in our decision. But the biggest factors are the difference between these minor treatments and the annual costs are several times more for resurfacing than they are for maintenance, and they're several times more for reconstruction than they are for resurfacing. So when we do our prioritization, the key thing that we look at is avoiding reconstruction, because that reconstruction is by far the most expensive kind of activity we can get into. And I'll discuss that a little bit more in a few minutes. So we can see the advantages of the lighter treatments, even though it only may not buy us that many years. There's a certain window of opportunity there when we can use preservation, and then we kind of move on to the need for more work with resurfacing, but still avoiding reconstruction. So I'm going to cover some different strategies that we've used, seeing those numbers and how significant the cost effectiveness is of using preservation treatments and avoiding reconstruction. Some strategies that we've implemented, and one is what we call strategic maintenance. So this refers to our own kind of internal bookkeeping, is that we have a maintenance budget that comes out of our operating budget that's separate from our capital program. But this is a case of where we're taking money from our capital program and we're spending it on maintenance because it's so cost effective. And we're saving money in our capital program by extending the life of these pavements, because anytime we can extend the life a few years, we're going to end up reducing the annual cost. And that's our key performance measure. So we've been doing this since about 2009. We figure we've saved about $15 million a year doing that. And in 2014, then, our executives initiated a directive that said before we're going to spend money on any capital resurfacing project, we must do preventive maintenance because of its cost effectiveness. Yeah, another strategy is what we call our chip seal conversion program. This is, again, going back to that table where we saw that chip seals were about 1/3 the life cycle cost of an asphalt surface pavement. So given that lower cost, if we have the right road at the right time, and this is usually for our lower volume traffic, we will change that surface type from asphalt to a chip seal, and we've done that now for about 1,500 lane miles, and we plan to do it over a 10-year period for about another 1,500 lane miles. So this is also going to generate some significant savings for us. Yeah?
So are you doing FDR on the old asphalt then and relaying it and gravel and all that and then sealing it?
Okay, now I thanks for that clarification, because I should explain. All we're doing is taking an existing asphalt surface and we're putting a chip seal over the top. So we're not doing anything below the surface. This is just changing a surface type.
Dave, what's the feedback from your customers?
Dave, can you repeat the question, because they're filming and so they might not be able to hear it?
Okay, the question was, what's been the feedback from the public in terms of changing a surface type from asphalt to chip seal? We've got some pretty good chip seal procedures in our state. We've got pretty good gradations of aggregate and pretty good construction methods. And a lot of our chip seals perform where you can hardly tell the difference. Sometimes it's difficult when you're driving out to determine whether or not you're driving on a chip seal or an asphalt surface. So in general, we haven't really received any negative feedback. The only negative feedback is usually in an urban area, but in urban areas we are kind of allowing more discretion, so that we may do asphalt at intersections. And even in our rural areas, many times we'll use asphalt in an intersection if there's a lot of turning movements, a lot of truck movements where it might tear up the chip seal surface.
Is that department force work or is it contract work, or both?
Both, yeah, depending on the situation. Okay, we have a situation with thicker asphalt pavements in Washington that drive some of the decisions that we make with asphalt. And this is just a diagram from our pavement management system that shows, this is just a cross-section diagram that shows different thicknesses over the years. But these are different projects that were done over the last 50 years on this particular example. So this is a relatively thick section of asphalt, but fairly typical, where it was originally built with about 7 inches of asphalt, and then it had a couple more overlays after that of a couple inches and ended up with about 11 inches. And then after that, it had, this is our very typical 1.8 inch mill and inlay that we do, and that's what that little, whoops, that's what that little orange or pink color is there, indicating we've had 2 mill and inlays in that area. So this is a very typical scenario for how we manage our asphalt pavements, is that with that mill and inlay, we're able to resurface and essentially renew that pavement structure. But the reason we have the ability to do that, it was from even back in the 1950s, a lot of these roads were built fairly heavy with structure, some of it to achieve depth for frost, but also they were all built with relatively conservatively, which has given us a lot of benefit in dealing with those roads today, because the situation that we have is primarily top-down cracking. Those thicker structures, probably 90% of our cracking is top-down. And even when you get a situation like this with pattern cracking, and we will do cores when we evaluate the proper treatment strategies, but when we look at those cores, we can see that the cracking is top-down. So with a 2-inch mill and inlay, then we've essentially renewed the pavement structure and we don't have any excessive deterioration that we have to worry about. So that's one of the advantages that we have. And this has been very successful in avoiding the need for any further, more serious type of either rehabilitation or reconstruction. Now moving on to concrete, we've also established a pretty strong rehabilitation or to extend our concrete life with dowel bar retrofit, diamond grinding, and selective panel replacement. We have a situation where our concrete pavements are aging. We've got about 50% of our concrete is now more than 40 years old. So we're going to be moving into another phase where we're going to have to be doing reconstruction every year on a certain portion of our concrete network, and we've addressed that. But the longer that we can string out that life through these procedures then gives us the ability then to establish that higher cost effectiveness. So if we look at our long life histories by pavement type, we can see, I mentioned on an earlier slide, where we've been pretty successful in avoiding reconstruction. This is a curve that shows a cumulative age from the time point it was either originally built or required reconstruction. So the gold is our concrete pavements, and actually it shows that our concrete pavements are our newest pavements, given that a lot of them were built in the 60s and 70s during the interstate construction period. But there's only about 15% of our concrete that's more than 50 years old. But with the asphalt and the green line, we have about 50% that's more than 50 years old. So the thought of doing a 50-year design where I'm going to reconstruct in 50 years, isn't really that appropriate if we can have half of our system that is older than that, and then our chip seals are even older with about 70% more than 50 years old. So the whole concept of avoiding reconstruction by doing the preservation and the thin overlays has been very beneficial to us. So in these years, and say in the last 10 to 20 years, we've done very little construction, total construction, and a lot of that is due to widening or new construction with new alignment. So we've been very successful in avoiding that reconstruction cost. So now in terms of looking at the effectiveness or determining how much has this saved us, we started with a tabulation of looking at a baseline. So this is a 2010 baseline, and so some of the strategies that I've been talking about, the strategic maintenance and the chip seal conversions, this is the total cost that would be involved given our total network of certain types of roads, the average service life we were expecting, the average cost. So this would be our overall expectation of annual cost given where we were in 2010. And then by looking at the implementation of these different strategies, we can calculate the same total cost. So we've got more chip seal miles, but with a longer life given the extension of the maintenance treatments. We've got fewer asphalt miles, but also with a longer life. We do need to do concrete reconstruction. That's part of our long-term plan. Down at the bottom, I've got this one line that says triage, then CSOL. Triage is a term that we use to talk about the preservation treatments of concrete, the grinding, and the selective panel replacement. The CSOL is crack, seat, and overlay. So we're converting a portion of our rigid network to flexible pavement because of the lower annual cost. This is similar in concept to what we did with the chip seals, where we converted existing asphalt pavements to chip seal surfaces. So we're using the same approach here with concrete. And if we add these numbers up, we get in 2025, and the reason that 2025 is used is because that's when we tend to have all of our chip seal lane miles converted, that we have a total of 244 million, which gives us a net savings of $80 million a year. So by looking at these different strategies, there are several strategies involved there. We can calculate then what the total savings is. So the approach of how we were able to do that relies a lot by complete and credible data. So we do an annual condition assessment. When we're looking at the right time for doing preservation and the right time for doing rehabilitation, we need to monitor the pavements carefully to make sure we don't get to that point where we need to do reconstruction. We have a robust construction history in our pavement management system so we can look back. That's how we were able to do all those calculations of our long performance ages, is that we have construction history records that date back to the middle of the 20th century. And we also have good economic records. Now, the good economic records were really hard to do. In order to have those numbers of dollars per lane mile per year at every location on your network, it required digging back into our cost records and digging back into our contract files and the way that our cost system works. And that was really difficult. It took us a couple of years before we finally got that pretty much automated. But once we got there, once we got those numbers, then we're able to use those so we can really look back, what did we spend, and look better into the future and where are we going to spend. So this amount of data that we have is really necessary, and we look at data as mitigating variability. This is a plot of the asphalt surface life we have across our network and how many years we expect between resurfacing. And you can see there's a tremendous amount of variability there. We have a lot of different climates in Washington, and these are all the different factors that affect whether it's traffic or the structure or the ground conditions. There are a lot of different factors that affect it. Yeah.
Quick question, is that remaining service life or is that the average service life?
Well, these are the lane miles of the actual service life. So if we have, of the most recent resurfacing of our whole network. So. Yeah.
Did you put all the costs for construction, for traffic control, all the, because there's some things that might not have to do with pavement?
Yeah. That was one of the things why I said it was hard.
That is what we're working now.
Is because when we're dealing with contracts, maybe on a given project we were doing some bridge work, maybe we were doing some culvert work, maybe there was some grading. We ripped all that out of there. So when we have costs, we feel confident they are only pavement costs, but it does include traffic control. It does include engineering. It does include, in Washington, we even have a sales tax that applies to the materials that are used on a project. So we feel that we've got a pretty clean cost estimate when we do that. So in monitoring all this with performance measures, the first one, condition, this is one that is very uniform. This is in map 21. But we really needed a better way of explaining. We developed these measures when we were trying to get some more money from the legislature and really trying to figure out how can we better explain the situation of our system without just using condition. So we have a publication in Washington called the Gray Notebook. If you Google Washington DOT Gray Notebook, it'll come up. But this is the performance publication across our DOT for bridges and congestion and safety and everything. But there's a section in there on pavement assets. And we developed these other additional performance measures to help explain our situation. One was remaining service life. This is fairly well known. The FHWA calls it remaining service interval, but we use it in the same way of how much life is left in terms of how much life do we expect to get out of a certain location, and then we add all that up for the entire network. Asset sustainability ratio is something that we got from Australia. It looks at how are we replenishing our system. Every year we're going to use up some of the life of the system? Are we replenishing at the same rate? It's kind of like if you've got 10 houses and you know you got to paint them all in 10 years, that you're going to have to overall, on average, repaint one house a year. And then the deferred preservation liability. So if I don't keep up with my needs in my system, how much have I deferred, and what is basically a liability? Because if I don't do the work on my system that I need to, I'm carrying that liability as I go forward. So we've got all of those performance measures in that we monitor on an annual basis. We also have in our pavement management system the ability to look at different scenario analyses. So this is when it says top down, it means we're not looking at each individual project across the network. We're looking at in general with these many miles of chip seal and this many miles of asphalt. If we change our strategies, if we change our annual funding, if we change the rules of what we consider to be acceptable and so forth, how will it affect these different performance measures as we look into the future? So unfortunately, the legislature is always asking, what would happen if we cut the budget this much or if we cut the budget that much? So we have the ability to come back and give them some feedback on that. So in summary, the outcomes that we've had from these different strategies is we can see that we've reduced our needs about $80 million per year as a result of a number of these different strategies, that we were able to maintain this acceptable level. We have very few sections of our network that we consider unacceptable, over a decade of reduced funding. And we did get an increase in our fuel tax that passed in 2015. I don't know if these performance measures and how we presented them and the arguments we made any difference at all, but perhaps it did, and we think it may have helped us get that additional money from the legislature. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Katie. This is contact information. If you come up with questions later on, you can contact any of us at WashDOT. We'd be happy to help.
Thanks, Dave. All right. Yes, definitely. All right, we're going to get into more of the interactive portion. Were there any questions for Dave before we leave his session? All right, I'm going to give this microphone to Greg, and as you'll notice, there are some cameras in the back, so this is being filmed, and so they need to hear from the audience, and so that's why we were having Dave repeat the question. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to address two things. One is I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we expect to see in moving forward and developing an implementation plan. And then I'd like to get to some ideas for what might actually help in the DOTs to advance this idea a little bit further. So I want to start with some of the challenges that have been recognized by some of our task group, technical work group, and by some of the earlier summits that we've participated in. One is that it's difficult to get an agency to shift away from a worst first strategy. And oftentimes people say, oh, well, right now we've got so many bad roads that there's no way we can shift to a preservation strategy until we take care of those bad roads. So the reality is you're never going to shift away from the worst first strategy if you don't just start chipping away at it. But it's hard to get that mindset changed. We also have heard the availability of qualified contractors, or being able to switch to chip seals in Washington State. if you really can't see much of a difference between an asphalt pavement and a chip seal, I think you're going to be much more successful than if you're in a state where your chip seal practices lead to broken windshields, customer complaints, and those kinds of things. So having the right contractors and people that are skilled and able to put in those good quality treatments is another challenge. And then being able to quantify the benefits to preservation. As Dave mentioned, there's a lot of differentiations in what you call preservation treatments and whether you include thin overlays as a preservation to recycling, some people call preservation techniques. So, you know, there's a lot of difference in some of the terminology, not having the right distress information, those are some of the things. Having the districts have gotten a lot of independence, and I think that they like being able to choose the kinds of treatments that I've heard from some of the district personnel. We know best what the conditions are in our region, and there's no way the central office can say what the right thing to do is. So, you know, that's a challenge to how do you overcome that and get them to be more preservation minded with some of the changes that are going on with performance targets. And then also allocating funding based on need. Often when you do that, you sort of are reinforcing the worst first strategy, because the worse the pavements are in your area, then the more money you get to fix them. So it kind of reinforces that over and over again. So those are some of the challenges that we've heard from people already. What I'd like to encourage you to do is there's a handout at your desk, at your seat, and we listed a column on the front page, one for technical issues or challenges that will need to be addressed, the other one for organizational challenges that will need to be addressed. And I'm thinking like technical challenges are, do you have the right tools? Do you have the right data? You know, those kinds of things. Organizational issues, you know, knowledge of preservation, lack of executive leadership support, any of those kinds of things would be some of challenges that you might jot down. Greg's got the microphone. Anybody want to share with us some of the bigger challenges that you think that we need to address in order to advance this technology further? It's because of those cameras, isn't it? All right, thanks.
I'd just like to ask what other states are doing to assess their roads. I noticed you said annually you assess every lane mile. Is that just a visual thing? Do you have some technology you use so everything's more objective, or how do you do that?
Let's get you a mic. Could you maybe use your microphone? Thanks.
Yeah, we have a survey van that collects the data. It's a semi-automated process where we do roughness rutting and cracking. We do video images, and then we assess the video images in our office using a semi-automated process. But we think it's important to do that annually because of the, you know, the road conditions may change, but we really want to be able to forecast, because we can't wait until we get up right to the year that a resurfacing is needed. We need that gets in the program years ahead of time, so we need to be able to plan and have those projects in the program ahead of time. And so we need accurate monitoring in order to forecast that, so just to do better forecasting and to try to reduce risk. The other states here?
Yeah, and states are required to collect condition information on the National Highway System annually, and there's certain information that they have to provide to the Federal Highway Administration. So that's pretty common to collect that kind of information on the National Highway System. Some of the people with larger systems, North Carolina in the back, has a huge system that they have to collect, so they can't collect on every mile every year. But it's the same kind of information that's being collected for those systems. All right, other challenges. Go ahead, Carolyn.
I'm going map 21, sorry. Map 21 is focusing on the NHS, but we have a lot of non-NHS that we're responsible for maintaining. So what the preservation techniques are the same, but maybe the money available to it isn't the same, and how do we address that?
Okay, all right, good, thanks. We had some district folks here, right? Was it, all right.
I'm not a district folk.
All right, were you a chief
but,
engineer guy?
One of the challenges we had is currently we have buckets. So we have a bridge bucket and we have a pavement bucket. We have kind of a mobility bucket. But what we struggled with is that should our pavement management system only identify issues, or I should say allocate money for what's between the white lines. So when we widen a project, is that truly a pavement need? Or if we change the geometry, is that a pavement need? And should that count for the districts?
Okay, should it count how?
We have something that's very similar to Washington DOT. We actually, each district has goals. So we have a candidate list. Each district is required to do so many miles within each category, whether it's preservation or rehabilitation. And that's a requirement in the STIP. You know, when we look at that, is like I said, should that count for their miles if they're going to realign a road for more of a safety issue or widen it for a safety issue? Should they get credit for that?
Okay, all right. Personal opinion from a preservation perspective, no. But I see the challenges.
I'm from Idaho, and one of the challenges we have, like all the other states, is it doesn't appear that we have enough money to do everything. So we've been challenged ourselves, the transportation department, is how do we put the money where it can do the most good? And one of the strategies we've employed is let's figure out where the trucks are, and let's do restoration and reconstruction techniques where trucks are, and the routes where we don't have significant trucks, we're attempting to focus our preservation efforts there. So we do the lighter treatments, seal coats and thin overlays there, and we hold our reconstruction and restoration to those routes where we have significant truck traffic.
Okay.
And we had to draw a line in the sand, and it was real scientific. It was me and two other guys in the room, and we said, okay, what if we had this many trucks? What if we had, and because we wanted to make a clear demarcation of these are commerce routes and these are non-commerce routes. And so that's an attempt that we've made, at least, to say, let's put money where it drives the economy and where we know we are going to see more significant damage quicker.
Okay. And I can see from a political perspective, too, that's going to be supported, I would guess, because you're feeding sort of the economic drivers in the state.
That was part of the logic. It was a tough sell, and we sold it to our transportation board about 2 years ago, and they struggled with that.
Yeah.
Because many of the routes that we called non-commerce routes feed these small communities, and they said, we cannot abandon our small rural communities because those are farm-to-market roads. We said, yes, they are, but because the truck traffic is much less volume-wise, the damage isn't the same as it would be on a road that carries a lot of trucks. So we want to send a clear message. We are not intending to abandon any of our roads. It's just since we don't have enough money, we want to put the right treatment on the right road. Some roads are good preservation strategy, and some are a restoration strategy.
All right, great, thank you. You were from a county, right? Yep. Excellent, all right.
So it definitely will be entertaining anyway, right? It's kind of a microcosm of what the gentleman from Idaho just said. But we've had a situation, when I started in 2000, we had 525 miles of paved road. And that's a variation of, real filled up asphalt. What we call a blotter is where I was getting confused on your description is like 12 inches of gravel with just a chip seal on it, and so on and so forth. Well, it got to the point, we're about 1,800 square miles. You're never going to be able to maintain all that asphalt. And what happens, to answer the gal sitting here at the table with me, is the hand plays itself out. And we've gone down 100 miles, and that's been reverted to gravel. And along with the gentleman from Idaho, we look at land use. We're predominantly huge corn and soybean country. Flat as this table where I'm from, and there's little pockets where there's cattle production, a little bit of pasture. In those areas, you can take a lot more liberties with what you try to get away with for what the road will maintain, because they haul the cattle in once, maybe back out, maybe, it's not like the horrific repetition you get with 200 bushel corn ground. So in reality, it's over the last 15 years, it just sort of took care of itself, and some stuff got so bad, as you might imagine, when you first go to revert things to gravel, or as I like to say, improve them to gravel, man, you're going to have a march on the courthouse that'd make Frankenstein jealous. They're just about going to kill you. But in the end, a portion of the roads that they just couldn't do anything with, and I was telling Greg here about the do-nothing option. Yep. Gosh, that's terrible. That's a bad thing to experience. And finally got to the point where people accept it. They're like, all right, I'll take the gravel road, I'll take the dust. If you can mitigate a few things for them with dust proofing and things like that, it's a little more palatable. But you reduce the service life. I'm not saying you make it any worse or make it dangerous or do anything like that, but it's similar to you switching to your chip seals. You got to find that niche and just kind of maximize where you're going to spend your stuff and maintain your service level. Now, I'll quit babbling, but.
Yeah, well, that is one of the challenges, and how do you get that accepted? Because executives, commissioners, whatever the group is, they don't want to accept a lower volume, lower quality road if they don't have to. And in reality, we can't maintain everything. Nobody's got the money to maintain everything. So in effect, by not investing in something, they're making a decision about the level of service that can be provided for that. And even if you're just investing in stopgap maintenance, you're making a decision about that network and what the conditions are going to be until somebody raises their, you get enough unrest, and then you change your philosophy again. But it's a tough thing to be dealing with. All right, any other challenges that you want to make sure we hear about? Yep.
So in Oregon, our system works fairly well as far as buckets of money and dealing with chip sealing, preventative maintenance, overlays, money set aside for the interstate. That works okay. Everything but the interstate's underfunded. But that aside, it seems to be a bit of a challenge with just the simple tasks like crack sealing, because it's not centrally controlled, if you will, or there's no central recommendation. And it's up to the different districts and regions. Some have less to do on their maintenance crews and are really focused on it as part of their culture. Other areas, not so much. And it would be nice to find some sort of tool to do some treatment to pavement that's actually still in good condition.
Okay.
And it'll on any of the data, it would never show that there was an issue there, really.
Okay.
Anyhow, yeah,
Okay.
that's the challenge.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So please, at any time, feel free to jot down ideas on those sheets. You'll notice on the back side, we have an opportunity for you to identify some implementation strategies. So that's where I'm going to move to now. Before I do that, I noted that we have 15 minutes left, so we're going to use that 15 minutes to talk about strategies. There was a sign-in sheet. Has it gone all the way around the room? Has everyone seen it? All right. And so it sounds like in the back they still need to get it too, so let's be sure that gets passed around. All right. So strategies that might help promote this life cycle planning. One of the ideas that was thrown out was, well, not thrown out, was suggested, was to develop some type of an app or some type of a tool that you could do a quick calculation. I'm thinking sort of like the forecaster tool that Washington State has, only maybe not as complex. But something where you punch in the number of miles you have, you punch in maybe the budget that you have, you punch in some levels of repair, and it does a boom, 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 and it says, well, if you did this strategy, it would cost you this much annually, and if you did a preservation strategy, it would cost you this much per year. So boom, here's your savings. A quick little seat of the envelope, back of the envelope kind of an analysis. Is that something that would be helpful, something that would make no sense? What do you think? I'm seeing a no. All right. Maybe get some ideas as to why are the no's? What is in Idaho? What?
I would be concerned with this because it would lead to a false sense of security. If I've got some kind of a budgeting tool that says, oh, this is what it should cost, I'll throw that in, I'll budget for that, then when I do my real engineering analysis, I'm going to miss the mark. So we're trying to do just the opposite of that. Think deeply about what we want to do and estimate with exactness, not just rough stuff.
Okay.
Because that's a problem for us. If I miss the budget on the front end, now I either have too much budget or not enough budget at the end. And so I want the number of projects and the budget to line up at the end of the year. And I don't want to scramble, or I don't want to fill more projects, and I don't want to come up short of funding either one. So I think you got to do a better job budgeting up front and get rid of the high level, just rough rule of thumb kind of stuff.
Okay, good.
I think it depends on the level of agency that you're talking about. Being at the county level, there are, and talking with some of my counterparts in our state, I think that the level of detail that the gentleman from Idaho is talking about is absolutely impossible for some of those agencies. So to have something simple that is some sort of tool to help them plan, and something that is simple to use, might turn into something that will be used and at least have something to be able to manage those assets. At his level, I'm sure that makes a whole lot of sense, but at other smaller agency levels, I think it's something that would be beneficial.
Okay. And the other thing I've heard too is in some of the counties, some counties don't even have engineers in charge or anything. So there isn't the expertise in place to be able to do some of the analysis that the states are able to do.
That's correct. And actually, in Wyoming, because of some funding that was allocated by the legislature, now at least the counties have the data to start performing analysis on the pavement condition. There's an area-wide or statewide now set of data down to the county level that allows somebody to take a look at that, whether it be a county engineer or a consultant, or maybe even perhaps some assistance from the state, but only there's only a few counties that are able to do that on their own in that state.
Okay. All right. Good. Let's go back to some of the district folks. Would it be helpful to you to have some sort of a tool that would allow you to better understand maybe what kinds of candidates for preservation are out there, or any feedback on that from a district or region perspective? My district people have gotten quiet. The one with the attendance sheet. Were you South Dakota? Were you a district?
Yeah, very.
Okay, so can I pick on you? All right, so would it be helpful to you? I know in South Dakota they're doing some preservation activities. That's a part of it. They do some chip seals and things. But would it be helpful to have some sort of a tool that you could do your own analysis to decide how cost-effective a preservation treatment might be, or do you just get that from the central office and that's good enough?
I think we use the central office as a good resource for us. So I kind of agree with it might give you a false analysis. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We rely on our central office quite a bit for that.
Okay.
But in your central office, do they provide you an optimization of projects and everything?
Yep.
Good.
Absolutely. Cost analysis and, budget-wise, they'll look at that.
Great.
And the whole analysis, yeah.
All right. Any other feedback on this idea? Sounds like it didn't go over well. All right. What about the idea of a video like you saw from Ohio? Is something like this needed in order to get the public understanding why we do what we do? All right. Hands, how many think this would be something that would go over? A simple, short video. Okay, all right, good. That's maybe half of the group. Other ideas for reaching people? Yeah, Carolyn.
Here you go.
I think some explanation of what the data means, because a lot of our, people don't, either they don't trust the data, don't really understand the data, the things that we're collecting for pavement and other ideas, not just that what Federal Highways requires us to collect, but maybe there's some other data points that other states aren't doing. That would be good to share.
Okay. All right. And I like some of what Washington State is doing too with like the financial metrics to show, if it's deteriorating or the amount of depreciation or deterioration is this much, are you investing at least that much back into your system? I mean, it's a simple little check to see whether you're investing adequately, but okay. What else? Is there training that's needed? Are there, yes, all right, maybe some ideas for what kind of training would be something we need to explore.
Well, from a maintenance perspective, as we've relied more and more on what we call the one-touch policy, there's been a real need for our maintenance crews to come up to speed to be able to do the preventative maintenance projects, especially as it relates to concrete pavement, but really across the board.
Okay. So that these treatments become successful?
Yeah, and they're done at a high quality.
Okay. All right. What else? Do we need to break down those barriers between capital and maintenance? Is that one of the issues in a DOT? Any feedback on that? That's one of the things that Dave talked about, was funding some preservation maintenance activities using capital dollars. Is there anything that we need to explore with that? Okay. One of the things I believe South Dakota used to do, I don't know if you're still doing it, the first chip seal after a resurfacing was funded with the construction dollars. Do you know about that? Are they? All right, so maybe we could have you guys talk a little bit about that and how you're doing that. Sorry. Picking on South Dakota here.
No, that's true. Our crack seals and a lot of our formerly contract maintenance monies, now are spent, like you said, with federal funds for those type of treatment and preservation options. Just in the 6 counties that I look over, we had concrete rehabilitation, we had crack seals, surface treatment, asphalt surface treatments, and we do pipe repairs and other things with federal funds too. So there's been a shift, I think, in South Dakota recently to that.
And as I understand it, the funding is sort of guaranteed and planned like 3 years out, that with the construction project, you've saved enough money to fund that next treatment, right?
That's true. Our surfacing program, our STIP, we have an 8-year STIP, but our surfacing goes out, I think, just really 3 years firmly ahead. One thing I may be digressing here, but I was kind of interested to hear that in some states, regions, are told you're going to do this much of each type of treatment. It's totally opposite than what we do, where everything's kind of more dictated from our central office. So I can see advantages and disadvantages, I guess, to that. So.
Okay. All right, good. Other feedback. So does the whole concept, is it worth putting forward? I mean, moving forward from an FHWA perspective in terms of advancing this technology in the industry? Is this something that we need to grab onto and promote? All right, Greg?
I guess I come more from a local agency's perspective, and from Washington State, and the DOT there does a fantastic job on the pavement management. At the local level, though, the idea of preservation is a real challenge for most legislative bodies to grapple with. So from the perspective of videos, any tools that could be developed that help explain it to the electeds, would help a lot. I think once they understand it, they get behind the idea. But it's difficult for them to grasp it. So.
Okay, all right. Good. Anything else? What's going to make us successful over the next few years?
So I am from Oregon DOT, and most of these things are in place, at least, similar to Washington State, with buckets of money for chip sealing that sometimes covers a thin lift treatment, more in the preventative maintenance rather than preservation category. But at the same time, my personal feeling is we don't do quite enough. Mm-hmm. And one of the barriers to that, in my mind, is it is fairly complicated to go contract out a chip seal program with federal dollars. There are, a certain number of hoops to jump through, and it does, you plan them 2 or 3 years out in the STIP, and then by the time the project comes, we've passed the mark with the pavement where it would have been optimized. So anything we can do, and I'm just speaking generally, not anything in particular, to keep preventative maintenance simple and easy to just do and be very agile and nimble with it would be really helpful, actually.
Okay, all right, good. And one of the other things that comes to mind from that for me is, should there be, like the drug companies have a certain percent that they reinvest every year in research? I mean, should there be some guidance as to, everybody should be reinvesting 5% of their network in preservation, or 5% of their budget in preservation, or, some national number that whether you're at the right level or not. I mean, it's going to depend on the condition of your roads, I know that, but just some guidance in that area might be helpful too, to know whether you're investing at the right level or at a reasonable level or not.
Hey, Katie, I'd like to expand a little bit on that. I worked for Federal Lands out on the east part of the United States, and for about 6 years, we were developing a program for pavement preservation for our parks, and we had 305 parks around the country. And through our pavement preservation program, it was kind of difficult in certain areas of where these parks are located to get that contractor to come and do that treatment. So we developed an IDIQ contracting process where we're able to put it out for over a period of 5-7 years, these type of preservation treatments that could be done, and we could bundle 3 or 4 or 5 different projects, have this contractor bid, and then keep them off to the side, similar to what maintenance has for some of their maintenance projects. Use those contractors when we have upcoming projects to help with some of those treatments if they're thin overlays, chip seal, fog seals, and they were really helpful for us. Because in some parts of the country, like I said, we just don't have the contractors that are experienced, and where we got those contractors from Arizona to come up to, say, Utah and Wyoming to do some of these projects to really share and have that expertise. So.
All right, I'm hearing the bell, so thank you to everybody for your participation. Please leave those handouts if you have jotted something down. I'd appreciate it if you just leave it on the table, and I'll pick that up. But thanks a lot for your participation, and please support our effort through your EDC coordinator. Thank you.